Hi, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of Taming the Tantrum workshop. I'm Susan Stiles-Sumstein with Take Group Parenting, and we have Amy Quayle is going to monitor the chat, and then we have Barb Tennison, who's going to be our facilitator today. So I'll turn it over to you, Barb.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, I hope people were. Oh, I got an echo. I hope people were here for the
part 2 of Taming the Tantrum.
I'm getting you. You're playing back to me, Susan.
With Take Group Parenting. Yeah. And we have Amy Quayle is going to monitor the chat.
Okay. Okay. So, Taming the Tantrum Part 1, for those of you who weren't here, was just kind of an overview of what tantrums are and what kind of tantrumers we're talking about here, and just kind of an overview of some of the approaches and things we can do. So I thought I'd start with a quick review of some of the things we talked about in Part 1. And one of the first things I wanted to review on is that for children, learning to manage emotions and behaviors is a skill that they need to be direct taught, just like we teach them how to read or how to use no colors, or those kinds of skills. Understanding those angry feelings versus the scared feelings versus the sad feelings, being happy without being overly excited and interrupting everything. Those are all skills that we have to understand that they need to be taught. They are not just born, and they don't have them just innate in them. Brain and neural development takes time, and it takes lots of repetition to build the neurons and strengthen the neurons for the kinds of behaviors that you want. If children are tantruming a lot, they're building the neurons and strengthening the neurons for the behaviors that we don't want. So we really want to work at the brain and the neural development and how to get the kinds of central nervous system development in place that will encourage the kinds of behaviors that will help children be successful. When a child is having an outburst, that is not the time to reason with the child. Their brain is shut down and they are not going to reason, even if they wanted to. The brain is shut down, they can't. Again, and I say this all the time, if a child has an issue, then it's up to us as the caregivers and adults to act on the issue and not react to the issue. That makes a huge difference. The next one is transitions, understanding that a change from one behavior activity to the next is a transition. Being outside and time to come in, being inside and time to go get in the car, all those things, playing with a toy and time to put it away and go eat or get ready for bed or whatever, those are all transitions. Transitions are probably when most of the tantrums are going to occur. And then we want to reinforce the behaviors that we want to see. We want to avoid reinforcing the behaviors that we don't want to see. And we'll get into that some more in a little bit later on in this workshop today. Let's go ahead and go. Last time we showed brain and neuron development, what happens when a child's brain is under stress all the time. This one is going to look at typical brain development starting at infancy and how just some of the basic ways that it develops and how we can reinforce it developing. There's 2 videos here. They're both very short. I think they do a really good job of making I could talk for hours on this. They make it visual in 4 minutes and explain everything really well. So let's go ahead and do the videos.
A child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a lasting impact on the architecture of the developing brain. Genes provide the basic blueprint, but experiences shape the process that determines whether a child's brain will provide a strong or weak foundation for all future learning, behavior, and health. During this important period of brain development, billions of brain cells called neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections proliferate at a rapid pace and are reinforced through repeated use. Our experiences and environment dictate which circuits and connections get more use. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent. Meanwhile, connections that are used less fade away through a normal process called pruning. Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neural signals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing a foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without the others to support it. Like building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later. The key to forming strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life, when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When the baby sees an object, the adult says its name. This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who consistently engage in serve and return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow.
Great. So I hope that helps people understand when I'm talking about neural development and why we repeat. You're building stronger neural pathways that will interconnect. And if you have a child who's learned a lot of tantruming, emotionally overreacting behaviors, it's going to take a lot of repetition to teach them new skills. You're not necessarily going to get rid of the skills of the behaviors overnight just by talking to them. They need practice, because without practice, they don't develop those really strong neural networks. I just wanted to touch base on this, a couple of other things now that I think are really important that we get into the next layer. And that's, we know what we need to do or what kind of behaviors we want to help the children develop for strong social emotional skills, but we need to also be aware of what our social emotional skills are, what our approach is. And so These are based on, you can see the responsiveness in the green arrow going up to high. Permissive parents are responsive and authoritative parents are responsive. Going down, the warmth lowers as they go down because there's just less nurturing and more controlling or ignoring. So let me go over what the 4 types of parents are. And this is going to be a really quick overview. And I'm not even going to say it's you need to change and become, if you're this way, you need to be that way. What I do want to know, to share, is that if you are one of the parenting styles that is not likely to be as engaged, that's okay if you're aware of it. Also, if you're co-parenting and you are a very responsive person and your co-parenting or co-caregiver is not, if they're authoritarian or uninvolved or something, you need to both be aware of that and work together and be honest. Otherwise, you're going to sabotage each other's approaches to teaching children skills. So let's talk a little bit about this. The uninvolved parent has little time to spend with children. When they're absent, that part means they're just kind of not socially there. They're uninvolved, absent, uninterested, neglectful. They just aren't very caring about the issues that are going on with the child right now. Above that is a permissive parent who will say to the child, no, you can't do that right now. And the child will say, oh, come on, please, I really want to do it. And they'll say, oh, all right, but next time. They give in. They don't stick to the limits that they set. They teach indirectly, they teach the child to manipulate them, to keep whining, to keep at them until they give in, because they know from experience that the permissive adult will eventually give in. So a permissive parent or caregiver may be really loving and caring, but they are not good at setting limits and teaching the child appropriate boundaries. On the lower right-hand side, or what I'm looking at, it is the authoritarian. They have high expectations. They look for power. They look for instant obedience. They are not going to deal with the emotions of the other person or the child. That's not their thing. They see discipline as punishment only. There's a lot of ways to enact disciplinary tactics, but they tend to see punishment or sometimes humiliation. Yeah, you look so stupid out there crying in front of everybody because you missed the basket, that kind of thing. Humiliating as a way of getting the response you want, or being totally demanding and instant obedience. Those are the kinds of things that are clear hallmarks of an authoritarian personality or caregiving style. The authoritative above that, the way that I've always been taught and the way I try to explain it, an authoritative person reserves the right to say no. That's it, you're done, stop, and stick to it. If they said it's a no, it's a no. However, they don't do it in an autocratic way. They will say, these are the reasons why I made the decision that I did. It's non-negotiable. And they will respond to the child. I can see you're disappointed. I understand that you're disappointed. It's still not going to happen. You cannot go because of this, or this. So an authoritative parent remains firm and in control and respectful while saying no. An authoritarian parent does not show respect, is almost can be at the extreme, can be emotionally abusive. They they expect absolute obedience and absolute control and no questions asked. And it says at the bottom there, because I said so. So, and these are not just for arbitrary conditions. These are conditions that really hold true. They've studied thousands and thousands and thousands of parents and families and parenting styles. And these are the styles that really clearly emerged over years of study. And it goes on and on and on with the outcome for the children when they are grown, which children have done drugs, which children have finished high school. Those sorts of things are all kind of related to these parenting styles. And I could go into a lot of reasons how they know that, but just know that they've gone in and researched, asked a lot of questions, done a lot of surveys, and come up with some pretty consistent answers on this. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to hit the chat button and Amy will let me know. So let's talk about some of the pre-strategies. If we're going to strategize how to work with a child who temper tantrums a lot, we need to first be really clear on some basics. Like they said in the video, the foundations, everything's interconnected. Let's have a strong foundation to build everything else on. So what is your personal understanding of the word discipline? Does it mean punish? Or are there other meanings for the word discipline? Punishment, setting limits, controlling the situation, making boundaries clear, having consequences, those sorts of things. What are the roles of adults and children? Some people always want to be the child's friend. Some people never want to be the child's friend and only want to be the person in charge. Some are much more interested in reciprocal relationships. These are the types of things that we need to know about ourselves and about the other caregivers that we're working with to raise this child. The other parents, the other teachers, the preschool teachers, the daycare providers, the grandparents, whoever is working with you, helping and interacting with the child. Being clear so that we can share our expectations, even if we don't agree. If I assume that you feel the same way about discipline that I do, and then we're at loggerheads and it's not working, that's a problem. We need to have this kind of information out there. What are your beliefs about respect? There's in our culture, there's the saying that children should be seen and not heard. And a lot of this, if you look back at our history, comes from, kind of the Puritan culture that women and children were the property of the men and they had no real control or autonomy. And so that belief that adults should control children and demand respect from children, even if they don't give respect, that's kind of pervasive through our society. Understand in your own heart and in your own being how you feel about children. Do they deserve your respect? How are you going to show respect? What kind of respect do you expect them to show you? And then another issue that we talk about are, what are your buttons? And this, sometimes I have when I have a longer workshop, we really put it out there, maybe even in small groups. My button that to this day, after all the years of teaching that I've done, a whiner will push my buttons. My youngest son went to a daycare many years ago that had a sign on the wall for the parents, a big poster that said, children cannot push your buttons if you don't expose them. So if instead of reacting to a whiny kid, I have learned to act on the whininess because it's pushing my button and try to get the child to learn better strategies and to avoid being a whiner to get their needs met. Some people, a lot of people say a kid who hits pushes their buttons, or children who are disrespectful pushes their buttons, children who disregard the emotional needs of other kids, those kinds of things. So it's important really to, and when I do this with a group, it's really interesting how few people have really stopped and thought about what their buttons are. So it doesn't make you a bad person if there's something that a child does that pushes your buttons, but it makes it harder for you to have good strategies if you don't even realize what your buttons are. You will be much more successful if you kind of got that clear. And again, with the coworkers. So I mentioned last week that on the playground, children going up the slide doesn't really bother me, but it pushed the buttons of my staff. And they did not like that. They felt that it wasn't safe, that there were a lot of issues, somebody might fall. And so we had to talk about what pushes their buttons and come to an agreement on what we were going to do as a unified front when a child went up the slide type of thing. And so even though I wasn't really all that concerned about children going up the slide, I respected the consensus, and we go up the stairs and down the slides, and that was an undisputed rule of the classroom. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So some other strategies is, and again, I told you I'm going to repeat this a lot. Act on the problem. Do not react to the problem. You will have much more success that way. And reacting often gets us in a position where we're not respectful, where we're being using a lot of the same tactics that the tantrumer is. We get mad when we react to the problem, when they tantrum and we react to it. If we act on it, we have to maintain some sense of control and respect. We don't have to approve of it. We don't have to let them get away with it, but we have to come up with a plan to act on the problem. Natural and logical consequences. I love this one. If a child goes outside on a day like today where it's cold and wet, and they're wearing their flip-flops, and you tell them, hey, your feet are going to get cold and wet, you need to put your shoes and socks on, and they won't do it, and they come in later and their feet are freezing, that's a natural and logical consequence. It's not going to kill them. We know that it's going to be a problem, and it's really hard for us to let them do it. However, they're going to be much more likely to listen to you the next time and not push that limit. I remember reading an article one time about by a person who was teaching children who came to the center after school, 8, 9-year-olds. And it was a sunny, warm day. And one of the children was playing with a hose and went to put a nozzle on the hose. And the person writing the article said, I told the child, turn the water off first or you're going to get all wet. And the child said, nah, I got this, and tried putting the nozzle on, and of course got all wet. And the authors said, the important thing is I didn't go up to the child afterward and say, see, if you had just listened to me, you wouldn't have gotten all wet. I told you that's what was going to happen. The author said, I just let it be. And that because I know that the next time the child's much more likely when I explain something to them to believe me, because there's the proof. They tried it without listening. They went against what I said and I was right. And so I built some credibility. I don't have to rub their face in it. I want them to trust me and know that I have their best interest at heart. Set limits that you are willing to enforce. We need to always have limits and boundaries that children can go up to, but not past. If they go past, you've got to have some kind of a consequence. If you don't, they're just going to keep pushing the boundaries further and further and further. And the older they get, the harder it is. And it becomes a habit. It becomes a neurological response, and it's much more difficult to deal with. So a simple example is, it's time to go clean your room. They don't go clean the room. It's time to go clean your room. I told you to go clean your room. They don't go do it. So then you tell them, either you clean your room right now, or you're not going to go to the birthday party next Saturday. Well, that's going to be really hard to enforce by next Saturday, because both of you are will have forgotten about the issue. It needs to be something that's directly related to the behavior that's happening now, that you want to have a consequence for, and you've got to be willing to enforce it. And then deciding who owns the problem. Once I had a classroom, and a dad wrote a note saying, how come the teachers won't let my kid have lunch at school? Or he came home hungry and he didn't get any lunch. And the teacher we were all shocked, because his dad was usually really supportive. Well, it turned out his son didn't want to admit the fact that the teacher had said, it's time to come in. It's time to come in from outside and have lunch. And he wouldn't come in. And she gave him a couple of warnings and said, well, if you don't come in now, then you're just not going to get your lunch today. We'll have to try it again tomorrow. And he did not come in. He owned the problem. It was his decision not to come in when he was given the options and given plenty of time and warning. He chose to ignore it. You don't own the problem. You don't have to force him in. You don't have to control the situation. You gave him the options. It's his opportunity to go with it or to choose not to go with it. Okay, and I really like this little, going with what I just said. And it should say caregiver, whether it's a parent, a grandparent, a teacher, daycare provider, whomever. When a caregiver punishes a child, it takes the responsibility for that misbehavior away from the child and gives it to the parent. And I think if we can grasp that every time we have to act on a problem, it makes it a lot easier to figure out what we need to do. So here's a little story that I think kind of helps illustrate this concept. I worked many years ago with a woman, and her daughter called her one day, and she had been fixing dinner for her kids. She called her in the evening, and she was crying. She was so upset. And the children were sitting at the table, and she fixed them some dinner and put it on the table. And the boy, her son, was about 4.5 years old. And she went back to the kitchen to do some dishes, get some stuff ready, and turned around. And he had played with his food and smeared it all around. And she was like, hey, you can't do that. What are you doing? That's not okay. And she took it off and took the food away and cleaned everything else up and gave him his food back. And she finished, turned around to do some more dishes or whatever. And she turned around, and he was taking his bowl of peas and throwing them all over the floor. And she was now on the phone crying to her mom because he wouldn't listen to her in spite of everything she told him. And her mom said to her, well, where is he now? And she said, well, I made him go sit on the sofa while I cleaned up the peas and the mess he made, which means that she punished him by sending him to the couch, and then she took on the responsibility of cleaning up his mess that he made. And so we'll talk about this when I can do this workshop in person with everybody. What could she have done instead? For one, once he smeared it up, she could have removed the food and given him a cloth and said, okay, when you clean it all up, then you can have your dinner back. Or if he threw the peas on the floor, then you can get down and you can clean up all the peas. When it's all done, if you are hungry and you want to eat, then you may have your food. It's his responsibility. He was the perpetrator of the behavior, of the mess. So she's not to take the responsibility for his behavior and take it away from him. She's to teach him the direct consequences of that kind of behavior. It also always comes up in these discussions that if she had prepared the children's food and sat down and had a conversation with them, none of these behaviors probably would have happened, because it was obviously a really big bid for her attention, that he was trying to just wanted to get attention. If children don't get attention from us in good ways, they'll get attention from us in bad ways, because it's still getting our attention, and that's the ultimate goal. You know, I understand that she had been working all day. Dad was doing night work, so he wasn't there to support her in this, and that it makes it really difficult. But understanding the reasonings behind and setting the limits and the behaviors and the consequences will make it a lot easier to solve problems like this. Okay, let's go on. So some of the pre-strategies, let's see, what are your buttons? Who owns the problem? So now we're going into redirecting inappropriate behaviors. If children have inappropriate responses to transitions, because that's a really common time for temper tantrums and outbursts to occur, then being able to redirect the behaviors before it becomes a full-blown tantrum is a really good strategy. Some people will say, well, you're just spoiling the child. If they're going to start throwing a fit, you need to tell them they can't throw a fit. That's not okay. And then instead of telling them it's not okay, you redirect them and give them something else to do. That's just going to teach them to manipulate you. And if you redirect inappropriate behaviors, understand it's coming, and pre-plan for it ahead of time, it's okay to do that, because what you are trying to do, again, it's the brain thing, is build neurological pathways of how to transition successfully. Redirecting the behavior at the beginning of a transition before it becomes a full-blown outburst will give them a chance to be more successful at transition. You're building the habits step by step, baby steps, little bits at a time. So for example, if it's time for a transition and they start throwing a fit, you can say, yeah, I know, I don't like it either. I don't want to be, I feel really mad inside too. Show them pictures. Is this how you feel right now? Are you upset? That sort of thing. Redirecting it, saying, but you know what? I bet when you're done putting this toy away and you get to go do whatever it is, you're going to look like this, and show them a happy face, that sort of thing. You can kind of nip it in the bud before it becomes a full-blown outburst. Give them a sense of what is appropriate and what isn't. Give them a little bit of predictability visually of what's going to come next. And they're much more likely, if that's a consistent kind of a response, to go along with it, to tamp down the outburst before it becomes full-blown and be able to work it through. One of the things that I really notice with children who have a lot of outbursts, a lot of tantrums, is that they do not really have opportunities to control much in their day-to-day life. They are told when to get up, when to move, when to eat, what to wear, what's going to happen now, what's going to happen now. Now you're going to do this. Now you're going to do this. So it's really actually a pretty easy thing to give children little bits of control all day long. So when they get up in the morning, you might hold up 2 different kinds of cereal. Which kind of cereal do you want today? Do you want this one or do you want this one? Okay, here you go. Put the other one away. Don't give them choices and then say, really, you want that one? but that's not got it. That's too much sugar. I don't think you should eat that one. Here, let's just eat this one instead. So you just gave them control and took it away. And of course, they're going to have a major outburst. So give them options that you're willing to live with. Do you want to wear these pants or do you want to wear these pants? Do you want to wear this t-shirt or do you want to wear this t-shirt? Those kinds of things, whenever you can embed it into day-to-day interactions with the children, will give them a sense of having some sort of power, some sort of respect enough from you to give them the opportunity to make choices, and it will make them feel more important and less unempowered. None of us like to have no power in our day-to-day life. All of us need to feel that we have the ability to make some choices, to be interactive with the comings and goings of our daily life. So embedding opportunities for a sense of control over what's going to happen is kind of easy to do for a really big payback. It helps a lot with the behaviors. And then this one's harder. Ignore inappropriate behaviors. Like I said, children, if they can't get positive interactions from us, they'll get negative interactions from us just because the whole goal is to have our attention and an interaction with us. In some cases, these children have gotten to the point, the deep tantrumers, the kids who have you walking on eggshells, that almost all interactions seem like they're inappropriate, that almost all interactions start seeming like they're negative. What you want to do is put the ratio of interactions out of the deficit of almost all of them being negative to more positive and fewer negatives. So that their brain circuits are used to being in positive interactions instead of only primarily negative interactions. So if they're acting inappropriately, they're trying to get your attention. It's a form of communication. It's a horribly annoying, dysfunctional form of communication, but they're communicating with you the best way they know how during this feeling, this intense feeling. If you don't want them to interact with you that way, then ignore the behavior as best you can. Some children are runners, and so you cannot just turn your back on them because they'll take off and head straight for the street or something like that. You can, however, get down at their eye level and they're here screaming and you just turn your head. And when they stop screaming, look at them. And then if they start screaming again, turn away. Give a little bit of body language, give a little elbow, shoulder, and not interact with them. And while you're doing that, a lot of times, even though their brain is shut down, I find it's helpful to be a broken record and say, I will listen when you can use your real voice. I will listen when you can use your real voice. I can listen when you use your real voice. Or that voice hurts my ears so much that I can't really hear what you're saying right now. I can't hear screaming voices. I can't hear screaming voices. Just giving them a little feedback as they start to come down and hear that, they'll kind of get it. And you have to then teach them how to use their real voice. I'm full of anecdotes. So I have an anecdote about a relative of mine. We had gone to a theme park. At the end of the day, their car was parked next to ours and we got in our cars to leave. And their daughter, who was 4, was strapped into the car seat in the back seat. And I had to get something out of the car. And I could see her sit down and put her thumb in her mouth, being really tired. And all of a sudden, She looks up and I could see by her body language, she was screaming. She was well known for screaming. Her mother in the passenger seat looks at the father, and you can tell that she's yelling, and he gets the look of a deer in the headlights and jumps out of the car and runs to the trunk. What it turned out is she needed her blankie to self-soothe, and she started screaming for her blankie. Mom started screaming at dad to go get her blankie, and he jumped out of the car to unlock it to get her blankie, unlock the trunk and give her her blankie so she could self-soothe. So they're already in this really downward spiral where they're teaching her when she is emotionally kind of spent, that if she screams and yells at them, her needs are going to get met just like that, and that they are learning that they have to hop to it just like that when she screams, and it spirals out of control. And I said to him, you know, in my classroom, one of the things we do with the kids, you know, I don't usually butt in, but is we tell them, okay, as soon as you use your real voice, I'd be happy to get your blanket for you. And this guy stopped and he looked at me like, wow, that's an incredible idea. You know, nothing like that had ever occurred to him before. It's okay to say things, to set expectations of being reasonable adults. I'd be happy to get that for you. I will wait until you can ask me in your real voice, and then I'll get it just like that. And it's just fine to do that. Okay, and ignore. Ignoring inappropriate behaviors, I gotta say, is you need to take deep breaths while it's happening. You may need to visualize yourself being put in a bubble with the child so that you can ignore all the stares from everybody around you. And then you can try, when they start getting upset and start getting better, you can do funny little things to sabotage their temper tantrum and say, yeah, I can see you're not screaming now. You might start smiling. Don't you smile. And that just cracks them up for some reason. So you can do little sabotagey, funny things to get them out of the mood, to snap the mood, to get them into more reasonable behaviors. Don't you smile has been a great strategy for me. Kids who don't want to leave school at the end of the day and have to get on the bus, and you get them out there in their school bus or in their car seat, and you say, oh, look at you. You're sitting there and you're being so grumpy. I'm so glad. I don't want to see you smile when you get to, you know, and they just look at you like, what? And it just snaps it out of it every time. Okay, Susan, let's go on to the next one. And yell at me if I'm running too long, Susan.
Okay, we've got about 15 minutes.
Oh, I'll never make it. Okay.
We go a few minutes over.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I was not taught until I had been teaching for over 30 years was that a great strategy for being successful in teaching kids good social emotional skills is to teach the rules. Make the rules. And you hear that a lot now at the schools, you know, be respectful. What is it? What's the other one? Be responsible and be safe or something. And for the young children, those are kind of like out there concepts. They need something simpler and more concrete. And somebody taught me to, oh yeah, you just teach them, be safe, be a good friend, be a good helper. No matter what behaviors you're looking for, good or bad, I swear they fit into one of those three rules. And it's so helpful to say to the child, oh, look at you, you held on to so-and-so's hand walking through the parking lot. You were being safe. Oh, standing on a chair is not being safe. We can't stand on chairs. That's a school rule. We have to be safe. One of the things when you have rules like that is that you are telling children, you can do this, you can't do this, you can notice when they're doing the right thing, all that, but it's the school rules. It's not you. They can't flail against you. It's like, what am I going to do? It's the school rules. And it's a really helpful strategy. Another thing is respond to the behavior that is not okay. So I remember when I very first in the 70s started taking early childhood type classes, they told us, do not use the term bad boy, bad girl. And it's like, well, wow, I never thought of it. Everybody just, hey, you, that's being a bad boy. Don't you do that. And we had to really stop and rethink about what we were saying to them, because the child's not being bad, the child's being childlike. It's the behavior that is not acceptable. So you can say to the child, I can see you want that toy. Hitting to get the toy is not okay. It doesn't make you a bad boy or a bad girl because you were hitting. It means that you are a person using a bad behavior, and teach which behaviors are okay, which behaviors are not. And it's kind of like nail biting. If you're going to teach them that this behavior is not okay, it's really helpful to teach them what behavior is okay. So I can see you want that toy. Hitting to get the toy is not okay. That's hurting. That's not being a good friend. That's not being safe. You could say, when you're done, can I have the next turn? Or can you play with the truck with me? Can we share the truck? Those sorts of things, and gradually teach them how to use their words and ask for turns. When you are finished, can I have the next turn? That's like mind-boggling to young kids. Okay, I need to get to the next slide before we're done. Pavlov's dog. And I don't know if people are taught about Pavlov's dog anymore, but it really helped me understand why it's so important to be consistent with setting boundaries. And consistency is so important. So Pavlov was a scientist, from 100 years ago, and he would feed a dog, and every time he fed the dogs, a whole bunch of dogs, he'd ring a bell in all these experiments. After a while, if the dogs heard a bell, they started drooling because they learned to expect food. It was a consistent response. Every time they got fed, they got the bell. So then Pavlov decided to not ring the bell whenever the dogs got fed. And over time, you could ring a bell and the dogs would no longer drool or expect food with it. However, one other experiment, if Pavlov rang the bell, say 1 out of every 5 times the dog got fed, or 1 out of every 10 times, the dog always salivated and drooled at the sound of a bell. They never got rid of that response because the bell and the food was still there, even though it was inconsistent. So if you are inconsistent with setting your boundaries, then 4 out of 5 times you say, no, I'm not going to let you do that. But on the 5th time, you let them get away with it, and do this all the time. Then they're going to learn to keep pushing, because maybe this time I'll get away with it. Maybe this time I'll get away with it. Instead of just learning to say, oh, okay, that's not going to happen, and move on. So avoid sabotaging situations. Don't set the children up to fail. If they're going to have a transition, it's sabotaging them to come up and say, okay, it's time to put it away right now with no forewarning. That's one of the worst things we can do to anyone, especially to young children. Giving them cues, giving them warnings. This is like people take tag board and do first and then, and maybe write what's going to happen or put pictures on. First you get to play, or first you put the toys away, and then you get to listen to the story, or get to do art, or you get to get in the car and go to the store, or whatever it is. First we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, so that they can predict the immediate future. Children do not tell time well. Today is, my son used to wake up from a nap and say, is today tomorrow? I mean, at 4 years old, they just don't quite understand the passage of time. It all blurs and blends together. What they do understand is right now, what's right in front of me at this moment in time. And that's where they live, is in this moment in time, in this moment in time, in this moment in time. So it's really helpful to give them predictors, to let them know what's going to happen next, and to give them time to adjust to that. And I often recommend using timers. And I showed the timer last week. I don't know if anybody got a chance to look on their phone or download their timers, but if you can see, this one is called, oh wait, stop. Okay, when the timer goes off, I just set it for 10 seconds. We're going to put the toys away and they can see what's going to happen. And then they get a fun little reinforcer. And it's called Countdown. But if you go to your app store and look for visual timers for children, there's all kinds of them and they're free and they are really helpful. You can use kitchen digital timers. You can use your voice. Okay, 3 more minutes, and then say 2 more minutes. And then when it gets 1 more minute, and then count down 10, 9, 8. And it gives them lots of warnings. It will really go a long ways to helping children understand what's coming next and prepare themselves to make the transition. Being visual as much as you can is really, really helpful. Let's go to the next slide, Susan. So for example, no biting. If you've got a child who is a chronic biter, you can, show them the picture. You can play with so-and-so, but no biting. If you bite, all done. Here, and then there's also the pictures of how to sit at circle time at school, how to sit and listen and learn, those kinds of things. And you can find pictures like these on Pinterest. You can Google visual schedules. And if it says for autistic, go for it anyway, even if your child's not autistic, which they probably are not. Autistic children are almost 100% visual learners, but all children are really much better at learning visually. And a lot of adults are too. So finding things that have already been invented and looking at visual cues and downloading them and printing them off, you can cover them with clear contact and keep using them. You can mount them on tag board. You can put Velcro on them and turn them over when they're done. Have little tags of Velcro on the poster board and on the pictures front and back so you can turn it. A secret with Velcro is one side is rough and one side is smooth. Rough won't stick to rough and smooth won't stick to smooth. And I've learned that the hard way. So put the smooth on all the pictures and the rough on your board, or vice versa, consistently. Save yourself a lot of grief. But again, we're visualizing for the children what the rules are. And then you teach it every day. Oh, let's see, what can we do? What are our rules for sitting at circle time? So everybody, your hand should be flapping at circle time, right? And that's sabotage. No, you should put your hands in your lap. What about touching all our neighbors? No, that's not a circle time rule. Hands in our lap. What do you know? Good for you guys. You've been really listening, that sort of thing, and repeating that over and over and over. They really learn from that, from repetition. It becomes a game. Let's go to the next one, Susan. How we line up. Lining up in a school setting is a transition. It's a transition for young children that is asking for trouble, because we say, go line up. That's unnatural for children to do. And we haven't made it really clear. This makes it really clear what you can do. And we've made it into a fun activity, tracing the footprints on different colored paper and then using removable clear contact to attach it to the floor, kind of a thing. They begin to understand. We used it in the bathroom for waiting your turn to go wash hands before snack time. There was always pushing and shoving and a lot of problems. But instead, we kind of got them to go look at where their feet went, and then they could talk at, oh, look, you can move to the next color now, those sorts of things. And we could talk about, we could put big footprints and little footprints and the different colors. There was all kinds of other things we could talk about with the footprints just by setting it up. So we made it visual, gave them something concrete and right here in the moment to give them cues on what kind of behaviors were expected. And then we could catch them. Look at you, you're standing on the 2 red feet. I'm so impressed. Thank you. You knew just what to do. You know, that sort of thing. You can catch them being good, and it's visual and it makes much more sense to them. So you're embedding a lot more success into their behaviors, even though it's a transition and not a fun activity normally. Okay, let's try the next one. Remain calm, teach children how to use their words to handle anxiety and anger. Anxiety is anger and anxiety put together. And this is something I would do. 2 kids would be fighting and I would get down and he won't let me out. I could say to the children, you know, so, you know, Susie, you wanted to play with that toy, but I want to. So Billy, were you playing with it and Susie tried to take it? Okay, Susie, can you say, can I have a turn too? Or something like that, whatever. And usually the child won't say exactly the phrase you gave them, especially in the beginning. They say, oh, my turn, something like that. And instead of waiting till it was their turn, the child that has the toy will, like 80% of the time, just say, sure, because you used your words, here, it's yours. And now we've had this successful interaction. So, and I don't know if you noticed that with the second video, especially that we saw earlier in this session, where the adults were always down at the children's eye level, talking with them back and forth, instead of standing up here in a power play, talking down to them. It's really helpful to get down at the children's eye level and kind of very quietly and carefully help them learn how to use the words. They're not going to know it off the bat. In fact, they're going to look at you when you say, what did you tell so-and-so when she took that from you? They'll look at you like, me? That's your job. You're the adult. I don't handle the problems. You're supposed to yell at her and get her in trouble for me. Getting that concept of you can handle this yourself. Here's some skills. That's really important. Keeping promises. Yeah, you know, parents on the phone. Yes, just a minute. Let me just finish this. Okay, come on, let's go. And you don't, I'll get it to you as soon as I can, but they don't follow through. The child learns that you say you're going to in a few minutes, but then you never do. So then they keep fussing at you time after time because they don't trust you to follow through on your promise. So it's really important, if you say, I'm going to do it when I'm done here, then you do it. You follow through. Okay, next one, Susan. These are some simple, I'll go through them really quickly. I would post them on your wall to remind you to do that, because once you get the hang of these, they really make a lot of difference. They really help. Avoiding words. We always say, no, don't do that. Instead of saying, wait a second, can we try this instead? What if you tried this? Instead of always, no, I'm telling you, no, I'm in control, is kind of standing back and trying to say it more conversationally. State rules neutrally and use as few words as possible. Use gerunds. Basically, a gerund is a descriptive word that ends, or a verb that ends in ing. So I worked at an elementary school one time. I had a preschool classroom, and it was the first classroom in a hallway that went on forever. And every teacher in that school was always yelling at the kids, "Stop running in the halls. Don't you run in the halls. No running in the halls. Don't run in the halls." And using a gerund would just say, "Hey, remember, walking feet. This is what I want you to do." Instead of always harping on the no, 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 here's what you do. Up, stop, walking in the halls, walking feet, that sort of thing. It really helps. Let me see. So developing phrases for problem situations, that would be like I talked about the slide. Up the stairs, down the slide. That's the rule. Okay. Let's go on to the next one. And then posting the classroom rules. This is another one that is from positive behaviors, those sorts of things. But you can find this very poster, you can find variations on this theme in Pinterest. If you Google, if you counseling pages, there's a lot of places you can find the pictures, because then you can go, oh, look, we're going to use our listening body, sitting and listening, raising our hands, that sort of thing. What kind of mouths are we supposed to have? Blah, 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 blah. No. That sort of thing. So visuals really, 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 really help a lot. And posting it instead of just being Charlie Brown's adults in the cartoons. Wah, 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 wah. You've got some real absolutes that you can point to and use. And then finally, the last little slide is just remembering, that it happens, that you're going to need to repeat this and practice this over and over for the children to accomplish these skills. It's not going to happen. Well, I told them that and they still do it. Well, yeah, but you haven't taught them the skill, just like they don't learn to play soccer the first time you teach them the rules. They aren't going to learn to have good social, verbal, emotional skills the first time you tell them. So these are the, there it is. Finally, change happens with lots of repetitions. Baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. You look for little improvements, and they do happen. It's fun to look back and say, gosh, remember back in January when we were nowhere close to this, and now it's May, and that hardly ever comes up anymore. So it's incremental. It happens very slowly but steadily. So I think that's everything. Next week.
Yeah, thanks, Barb. Next week will be part 3 of Taming the Tantrum. It'll be next Wednesday at 2:00. And thanks, Barb, for providing some great information today.
Yes, I always run out of time. There's so many good things to share.
There was a lot of great information. So thanks everybody for watching, and we will see you next week.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.